Mysterious Visitors, by Brinsley Trench. Part 1. A Well-Kept Secret. 1. The Myth That Will Not Die. The last quarter of a century has seen the emergence of a myth. We use that word, because the pundits have stated in an official report that unidentified flying objects, UFOs, more popularly known as flying saucers, do not exist. Strangely, the myth refuses to die. Since the report was published in January 1969, people have gone on seeing and reporting UFOs all over the world. How did it all begin? That is a difficult question to answer. It would seem that unknown flying craft have always been with us. There are reports going back all through history of strange flying discs, cigars, triangular and star-shaped objects being seen in our skies. Many well-researched books have been published listing these sightings back to the era of the ancient Egyptians. However, there are references in the world scriptures to what we would now term UFOs. Our own Bible contains many passages about celestial chariots, and the Hindu Vedas abound, with accounts of flying ships called vimanas. It was just after the end of the Second World War that the UFO explosion took place. Prior to then, sightings had been sporadic, though there had been some flaps in the USA in 1896-97, as well as in the UK and New Zealand in 1909. Possibly, it was a coincidence, but the fact remains that the modern intensive influx of UFOs into our airspace began just after the first atom bomb had been let off in 1945. The following year, Scandinavia was visited by numerous cigar-shaped objects, which were termed ghost rockets. In 1947 the flying saucers really got around. From then onwards, thousands of people were seeing them. Pilots, police officers, sailors, farmers, doctors, lawyers and people in every walk of life. The myth was seen over North and South America, Europe, Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, New Guinea, and literally, over every country in the world, as well as over the polar regions. The myth has also been tracked many times on radar screens, in addition to being photographed and filmed. A strange sort of myth. The official report mentioned earlier was issued by the University of Colorado panel of scientists headed by Dr. Edward U. Condon, a distinguished physicist. This committee was convened under contract to the U.S. Air Force to investigate the UFOs. The committee should never have been allowed to proceed with its work after the discovery of the infamous memorandum, written by the project coordinator, Mr. Robert J. Lowe, to another member of the proposed committee, before the contract had even been signed between the university and the Air Force. The memorandum was called, Some Thoughts on the Ufo Project, and included the following passage. Our study would be conducted almost exclusively by non-believers who, though they couldn't possibly prove a negative result, could and probably would add an impressive body of evidence that there is no reality to the observations. The trick would be, I think, to describe the project so that, to the public, it would appear a totally objective study, but to the scientific community, would present the image of a group of non-believers trying their best to be objective, but having an almost zero expectation of finding a saucer. One way to do this would be to stress investigation not of the physical phenomena, but rather of the sociology of persons and groups who report seeing UFOs. If the emphasis were put here, rather than on examination of the old question of the physical reality of the saucer, I think the scientific community would quickly get the message. I'm inclined to feel at this early stage that, if we set up the thing right and take pains to get the proper people involved, and have success in presenting the image we want to present to the scientific community, we could carry the job off to our benefit. The discovery of this memorandum resulted in an unholy row within the committee, and the resignations and dismissals of some of the members. The whole sordid story was published in a full-length article in Look magazine. Since then, it has been commented on elsewhere, and the sorry tale has never been refuted. The committee should have been dissolved instantly, and a completely new one formed, to undertake the investigations without prejudices or bias. This was not done, and although there are some worthwhile points in it, the entire Condon report must be regarded as tainted, invalid, and without integrity. The damage resulting from the publication of the report is incalculable. The public has been brainwashed into accepting that the UFOs do not exist. After all, authority has stated this through the Condon report. However, the myth has not died. The UFOs are very real. They have gone on appearing in our skies, though as a result of the report, national newspapers in the UK and in the USA did not give them their former prominence for some time afterwards. 2. Mystery on the Moon. Many of us were enthralled by that magnificent film 2001, A Space Odyssey, made by Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke. Viewers will recall the crystalline monolith that mysteriously appeared on the Moon, and other planets in the film. This was all brought vividly to mind when the following news item appeared in the Daily Telegraph on July 10, 1970. Mystery of Moon Spires, by our New York staff. Photographs of the lunar surface have revealed objects that appear to have been placed there by intelligent beings, it was claimed yesterday. Mysterious spires on the Moon were said to have been revealed in pictures taken by Russia's Lunar 9 and America's Orbiter 2 spacecraft 4 years ago. The claims were made in the Argosy magazine, which said the Russian and American spacecraft had photographed groups of solid objects at two widely separated locations. These two groups of objects are arranged in definite geometric patterns, and appear to have been placed there by intelligent beings. The photographs taken by Orbiter 2 showed what appeared to be the shadows of 8-pointed spires, shaped like Cleopatra's Needle. Mrs. Judith M. McGee, writing in the Australian Flying Saucer Review about these mysterious spires, states that Soviet space engineer Abramov has come forward with a somewhat startling geometrical analysis of the arrangement of these objects, which produced a pattern known in ancient Egypt as an abaca. He stated that the centers of the spires of the lunar abaca are arranged in precisely the same way as the apices of the three Great Pyramids. Actually, over the last few years, many moving and stationary objects, as well as lights, have been seen on the Moon by amateur astronomers. For example, there was the controversial bridge on the Moon first seen by the late John J. O'Neill, former science editor of the New York Herald Tribune. He observed through his telescope a gigantic bridge over the Mare Crisium. His was in July 1953. Astronomers everywhere ridiculed his claim. Then, a month later, the late Dr. H. P. Wilkins, well-known British lunar expert, confirmed that as a result of his own sighting the bridge was there, though not as big as O'Neill had stated. The extraordinary point about the Moon Bridge was that though astronomers had been looking at that very spot on the Moon for years, no one had noticed it before. Now, we are informed that the bridge is no longer there. It may not be widely known that our astronauts are continually seeing UFOs on their trips in space. This has been happening for years now. Major Robert White notched up a high-altitude record when he flew the US X-15 high-altitude rocket plane to 314,750 feet on July 17, 1962, according to Time magazine. Major White suddenly yelled over his radio to ground control, "There are things out there." A big object had flown alongside his plane at 3,800 miles an hour. It had then passed ahead of him. While astronaut Gordon Cooper was making his 15th orbit around the Earth on May 16, 1963, he informed ground control when passing over Australia that a glowing green object was approaching his spacecraft. The object was also seen by those on the ground. In an earlier book, we covered the UFO sightings by astronauts to some extent, but this bit of information is worth thinking about. According to an article in Saga magazine, Dr. Gary Henderson, a top space research scientist with General Dynamics, has stated that all American astronauts have seen UFOs, but have been told not to discuss their sightings with anyone. The general public may not realize it, but conversation can be censored out of the transmission between astronauts and ground control by the delayed tape technique, which allows a lag of up to 2 or 3 minutes between mission control at Houston and the continuing broadcast into your home. Actually, amateur radio operators, or radio hams as they are popularly known, who operate on different frequencies can pick up these censored pieces of dialogue. In this connection, there is a story going around concerning the Apollo 11 team, that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin saw something very spectacular on the Moon, and that their conversation about this was deleted from the live broadcast by the delayed tape technique just mentioned, and that some radio hams picked this up. It is of course possible that this did occur, in view of all the other incidents that have been related and which are true, but perhaps, if any radio hams did hear anything unusual they will fill me in. However, it would seem that UFOs accompanied Apollo 12 part of the way to the Moon. Here is a quotation from Saga magazine. On Friday evening, November 14, 1969, observatories all over Europe sighted two bright flashing unknowns near the path of Apollo 12, which was on its way to putting America's second team of astronauts on the Moon. Seen through huge telescopes, one object appeared to be following the spacecraft, and one seemed to be moving in front of it. Both objects were blinking on and off rapidly. On Saturday, November 15, our three astronauts, Pete Conrad, Dick Gordon, and Alan Bean, reported to Mission Control in Houston that they had indeed spotted two bogies 132,000 miles out. Why doesn't NASA tell us the whole story behind Apollo 12's mysterious encounter with flying saucers? One reassuring fact is that, though so many astronauts have seen UFOs in space, there have been no hostile incidents out there. Even though America has now landed several teams of astronauts on the Moon and brought them back safely, there is still a great deal to be explained. There are too many question marks sticking out like a sore thumb. Why doesn't NASA come clean about the large number of UFOs seen by astronauts? Is the Moon being used as a UFO base? What about those enigmatic moon domes? They were first noted nearly 40 years ago. By 1960, more than 200 had been recorded on the lunar surface. What is even more odd, it was noticed that they moved about on the Moon from one position to another. Both Dr. Walter Riedel, late director of the Peenemünde base in Germany, and the American astronomer Dr. Carl Sagan, expressed the view some years ago that the UFO occupants were using the Moon as a base from which to observe the Earth. There is supposed to be only a very thin atmosphere on the Moon, but perhaps a very advanced race could have developed underground installations and living accommodation, and put in their own air conditioning systems to overcome the lack of oxygen. A rather startling idea, but so would color television, radar, and our own spacecraft have been a few hundred years ago. One day we shall know for certain. However, one thing we do know, and that is the truth is being withheld from us. In recent years there has been a tremendous amount of UFO activity over South America, especially in Argentina. In an article published in Flying Saucer Review, Gordon Creighton described a massive UFO visitation of Argentina in 1962, and wrote, "Indeed, during the 24 hours from midnight of Saturday the 12th to Sunday the 13th of May, UFOs were seen all over the Argentine, and landings occurred at several places, such as Oncativo, Córdoba province, and Zapala, Neuquén." One newspaper said that this flood of sightings might well mark a new era with regard to the UFO problem, a key day in the history of mankind. The paper added that strange cosmic happenings throughout the country had a profound emotional impact upon the many eyewitnesses. On June 13, the Buenos Aires paper El Mundo reported that there had been so many saucer sightings over the Bahia Blanca area, that the chief of police in La Plata had summoned all eyewitnesses to appear before him and give statements. Some of the reports were of landings. The paper described the events as sensational, and said the UFOs were visitors from space. During the night of June 15 at Mar del Plata, numerous people saw a UFO, while at the neighboring coast resort of Miramar, a cigar was seen at 9:30 p.m. flying in from the direction of the South Atlantic. The whole craft was vividly illuminated and carried, in addition, three very bright lights, red in the center, yellow on the right, and green on the left. The apparent size of the cigar was greater than the diameter of the Moon. Mr. Creighton went on to give a number of well-authenticated reports culled from the large quantity of newspaper clippings, sent by the Review's correspondents in South America. Here is another especially interesting one. At about 2 p.m. on July 19, the whole body of over 150 workmen at the Auto Union DKW car plant at Sauce Viejo, near Santa F6, which is northwest of Buenos Aires, saw a cigar moving rapidly towards the northeast. It seemed to be at a height of about 100 meters, and gave out frequent blinding flashes. It was silent and left no trail, climbed and rapidly disappeared. Observers said the same type of craft had been seen there several times before. The event that really caused a furor was when a UFO landed on the aerodrome at Camp Punit, province of Corrientes, far northeast tip of Argentina. The airport manager, Senor Luis Harvey, explained that he had been warned by his staff that an unannounced aircraft was about to land. He ran out onto the field and saw a luminous object circling above at high speed. Failing to get any reply to their signals, He and his staff prepared for a landing, but when the object came down, they were astonished to see that it was no aeroplane at all, but a completely spherical body that hung, hovering and also revolving, a few feet above the same spot on the runway for some 3 to 4 minutes, emitting all the while powerful blue, green, and orange flashes. Then, as the astonished officials approached, it climbed and vanished at staggering speed. The incident was at once reported to the authorities and an intensive investigation was launched. Various newspapers carried reports and commented on this fantastic event. Creighton wrote, La Razón, Buenos Aires said, "We do not believe the true explanations of these occurrences can be kept secret much longer." Los Andes, a paper published in the Andean province of Mendoza, voiced the same view, and another important northern paper had the following significant comment: the arrival of this interplanetary craft on an aerodrome in the province of Corrientes, a fact that can in no way be disputed, given the manner of its appearance, and the caliber of the eyewitnesses, serves to strengthen the view that there may be space people's bases somewhere in the country, in view of the great number of recent sightings. However, an even more blatant saucer landing on an airport occurred in December. On December 22, the Buenos Aires papers reported that, a day or so previously, a saucer had landed at 2:15 a.m. on one of the main runways of the international airport at Ezeiza, near Buenos Aires. The machine had remained there, sitting on the runway, until disturbed by the arrival of a giant Pan American DC-8 passenger plane. The principal witness interviewed by the press was Senor Horacio Alora, officer in charge in the flight control tower. He said that he and his colleague Senor Jose Bisutti had watched as the intensely luminous UFO had landed some 2,000 meters from the control tower. At that distance, the object had the apparent size of a football. When it took off again, it went straight up to an estimated height of 500 or 600 meters, and then made off at vertiginous speed. He and his colleagues had in fact been getting ready to bring in the Pan American DC-8, and the behavior of the UFO was consequently something that they had to watch most carefully. One of the Buenos Aires newspapers pointed out, in commenting on this case, that such a landing on an important international airfield proved clearly that the saucers were no longer content to land merely in out-of-the-way places. They were now coming down boldly on the principal airfields of the country. It can clearly be seen from the foregoing startling incidents that the UFOs were flying and landing, wherever they wished, all over Argentina in 1962. It would seem very likely that they had established bases in the more inaccessible mountainous areas. However, at the same time as all this activity was going on, many UFOs were seen to dive in and emerge out of the sea, off the coast of the country. Creighton gives an interesting example. In an interview with journalists which appeared in various papers in August 1962, Senor Vicente Bordelli, a truck driver living at Mar del Plata, stated that when driving southwards along National Highway No. 3, which skirts the South Atlantic coast of the Argentine, he and his son Hugo Bordelli had frequently seen strange luminous craft, both entering and leaving the sea. In his view, these craft, veritable flotillas of them, are controlled by signals emanating from underwater bases, perhaps from large submarine mothercraft. Senor Bordelli concluded his statement by saying, "Is absolutely certain that in the depths of the Gulf of San Matias, there is a flying saucer base." During 1963 and 64, UFO activity in South America continued, if anything, on an even wider scale, involving Peru and Brazil, as well as Argentina. This infiltration of South America has continued ever since, and now, according to Spanish newspaper reports, the UFOs have a base in the depths of Lake Titicaca, which borders Peru and Bolivia, and is some 12,000 feet up in the high Andes. People living near the lake have frequently seen saucers heading towards it and vanishing. Why so much emphasis on South America? It would seem that this is a subcontinent containing many areas that are sparsely populated. In the Argentine, the land is rugged and ideal terrain for the UFO nauts to establish bases. Many strange lights have been observed flitting to and fro in the mountainous region of the high Andes. If you think that Senor Vicente Bordelli's statement about underwater bases a bit way out, there is one scientist who would probably not have agreed. He was the highly respected botanist, the late Ivan T. Sanderson. He was a former member of British Naval Intelligence, a Fellow of the Royal Society, and had taken part in many zoological expeditions around the world. One of the main themes of his notable book, Invisible Residents, is the proposition that an underwater civilization has existed, possibly for millennia, capable of space travel. Sanderson points out that the oceans occupy 3/4 of the surface of our planet, and are often over 2 miles deep. We know almost nothing about what goes on at the bottom of the oceans, but Sanderson states, we do know from ship's logs and from eyewitness accounts, that many objects have been observed entering and leaving the seas. It is possible then, that the UFOs have established bases in the oceans for a very long period of time, and are now busy extending these to land ones in isolated areas, particularly in South America. If this is the case, then surely the authorities must be aware of this significant situation. However, it is one of the many things in the UFO story that we are not officially told about. One more instance of the Great Cover-Up. 4. The Cover-Up. For the past 2 decades, the U.S. Air Force had a project which handled all UFO reports sent in by the public. In the early days, it was known as Project Sign, then as Project Grudge, and for most of the last 20 years as Project Blue Book. The late Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, former head of Blue Book from early 1951 until September 1953, after his retirement from the Air Force, wrote a fine book called The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects. In one chapter, Ruppelt stated that he had qualms as to whether the project was just a Front 5, a cover-up for a real investigation of the UFOs. Some years ago it became obvious to me that Blue Book was not doing a real investigation, but merely explaining many sightings away as rational objects, natural phenomena, and hoaxes. At that time I was working for an aviation magazine and found myself over in Paris in connection with my job. I met an American who was then working in the publicity section of Republic Aviation's Paris office. During conversation over lunch, it came out that he had worked on Project Blue Book. This was his last assignment before leaving the U.S. Air Force. I asked him about his work with Blue Book. His job was fieldwork, including interviewing eyewitnesses of UFOs. He told me that their brief was to rationally explain as many sightings as possible. Many people, he told me, sincerely misrepresented what they had seen. However, there were a few sightings that they couldn't explain. What happened to those? I asked. They were filed away, 5 was his reply. The sightings that could not be explained were the most important ones. Yet, a former member of Blue Book told me that they were filed away. Since the publication of the Condon Committee's report, the U.S. Air Force has used this as a convenient excuse to close down their Project Blue Book. Now, like Ruppelt, I am sure that all these unknowns are being investigated by some intelligence group in the USA. It is my conviction that it always has been covertly at work. It has now been disclosed that the Central Intelligence Agency, which has ramifications all over the world, has got involved with the UFO business. The late Drive. James McDonald, who was senior physicist at the Institute of Atmospheric Physics, and professor, Department of Meteorology, University of Arizona, came into prominence in the UFO field with his discovery that evidence had come to light that the CIA had initiated a program specifically to debunk the flying saucers in the early 1960s. You may well ask, why? The reason given was that the USA was then involved in the Korean War, and that too much concern with UFOs would take the minds of Americans off their war. Sounds a little thin to me. There have been many cases of both CIA and FBI agents calling on members of the public who have seen UFOs. David Saunders and R. Roger Harkins in their book, UFOs? Yes. Which is a reply to the Condon Report, have plenty to say about CIA involvement. Saunders is an ex-member of the official study group and one of those who left the committee after the discovery of the Lowe Memorandum. This is their assessment of the CIA involvement. 1. After the tragedy at Pearl Harbor, our government created an organization, the CIA, designed specifically to make sure that something like Pearl Harbor never happens again. 2. UFO reports exist. 3. In the reports, we find patterns which indicate that the reports are based upon real occurrences. 4. If UFO reports are based upon real occurrences, that is, actual physical objects invading our airspace, this becomes a national security problem of prime importance, exactly the sort of thing the CIA was designed to handle. 5. The existence of unidentified vehicles invading our airspace must be interpreted as indicating the existence of a possible unknown enemy. 6. Standard intelligence procedures would require that all information of this nature be withheld from the general public, until firm conclusions could be reached, since any disclosures might furnish aid and comfort to the unknown enemy. 7. This would indicate that the CIA cannot avoid the responsibility for the problem of the UFO mystery. In retrospect, we can see that the Robertson Committee, a panel set up to evaluate UFO reports a number of years ago, was a device used by the CIA to establish a cover program, namely Project Blue Book, to draw attention from a covert program designed to solve the UFO mystery for intelligence purposes. That assessment by Saunders and Harkins of CIA involvement sums up the position very well. In short, until the covert military intelligence group investigating the UFO situation comes up with some pretty firm idea of the UFO mystery, and of the UFO-nauts' intentions, then they are going to keep the whole thing under wraps. This explains the many ridiculous explanations put out by the authorities about UFOs sighted over the years by experienced pilots, who know what there is in the sky. They have been told that what they saw was the planet Venus, spots before the eyes, and many other ludicrous things. That is why pilots got sick of handing in UFO reports. The part of the CIA in all this has been to try and play the whole thing down, witness Dr. McDonald's disclosure, and to ferret out anything that might be of interest to the actual real investigation covertly in progress. The fact is, the investigating group are aware of the reality of UFOs, but do not know what to do about it. They are defeated and at a complete loss as to how to cope with the situation. The major factor confronting them is that the UFOs are paranormal, that is, from invisible universes, and their occupants are capable of using extrasensory powers, especially possibly not all of them. There is some evidence to support the contention that humanoid robots are being used to carry out some jobs here. The authorities just don't know how to put this all over to the public. We shall see in the next few chapters evidence supporting these statements that the UFOs may well emanate from other spacetime continuums. We sympathize to some extent with the authorities in their dilemma. It is also appreciated that back in 1938, when Orson Welles broadcast H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, there was widespread panic. The broadcast was so realistic that many people thought the Martians were invading the world and streamed out into the streets. It took some persuading to get all those refugees with their belongings to return home again. Obviously, the authorities don't want such a thing to happen again. Surely though, the long-term plan should have been to gradually educate the public, up to the time when an announcement could be made. The public would then have been prepared for better or worse. Now, the authorities are running the risk that if a mass landing was to take place tomorrow, then a far worse panic might occur. Mark you, I don't think this likely, as it is my personal opinion that the sky people are too wise to take such action at this moment. Nevertheless, an informed public is a prepared public.